November 2011. On a cold afternoon, the doors to New York's most prestigious art gallery were locked. The Grand Mansion was suddenly empty, its legacy destroyed overnight and caught up in disgrace after a scandalous closure. For 165 years, it had survived wars, economic crashes, and even 9/11, only to collapse under a shocking wave of accusations, forged masterpieces, a $70 million fraud, and a trail of lies that had ensnared the elite of the art world. At the center of it all was Anne Freedman, the gallery's mysterious director with zero experience. How did this inexperienced figurehead take part in a decade-long deception, selling fake paintings to billionaires and world-renowned collectors? And what really happened behind Knoedler's doors? Founded in 1848 as a mere extension of a French firm, it was part of a long game to manipulate and control art in America long before museums were even a thought. The gallery, with its extensive ties to the powerful, orchestrated the acquisition of masterworks that now make up the foundation of America's most prestigious collections. Michael Knoedler didn't just buy the New York office from Goupil et Compagnie. He took over a business that was already built on manipulating the art world, turning it into a money-making machine under his own name. From the very beginning, Knoedler was less about art and more about the hustle. He wasn't just selling paintings. He was selling America's self-image, starting with a full-size engraving of Washington crossing the Delaware, Emanuel Lewitz's overhyped patriotic masterpiece at a modest $20 a pop. That was just the start of his greed-driven vision. Then came the gold rush, and with it, the first wave of oil tycoons who were eager to inflate their wealth with fine art. By 1859, Knoedler had ditched his old digs for a prime location across from Grace Church, where he catered to a new breed of wealthy mansion owners. The gallery was no longer just a place to buy art, it became the New York art scene. However, it predated the city's major art museums and was essentially the center of the art world for anyone who could afford it. When Michael's son, Roland Knoedler, joined in 1877, he teamed up with Charles Carstairs to expand the operation, opening offices in Paris and London, and making sure they had all the right connections to push their agenda. Roland Knoedler, who inherited the business after his father's death, continued this ruthless expansion with the goal of cornering the market on old masters and dictate the flow of art in the elite circles of America and Europe. Thanks to Carstairs and his dealings with other art dealers, M. Knoedler and Company rose to the top in selling old master paintings, at a time when collections were being sold off to the highest bidder after the First World War. By the time the First World War ended, the Knoedler Gallery had its hands deep in the pockets of the rich, facilitating the sale of priceless works that were often stolen or sold off by desperate European families. Behind the scenes, they were not just dealers. They were history makers, shaping the provenance and pedigrees of paintings with the sole purpose of inflating their value and preserving the power of the wealthy elite. For decades, they forged connections with people like Cornelius Vanderbilt, Andrew Mellon, and Henry Clay Frick, providing them with the illusion of culture and sophistication. By the 20th century, Knoedler's stranglehold on the art market had reached its peak. But rather than slowing it down, the gallery leaned even further into controversy, one that no one would expect from a business with such a prestigious reputation. They became masters not only of selling art, but of creating it out of thin air, fabricating authentic pieces that were nothing more than high-priced forgeries. How did a gallery with such an impeccable reputation manage to sell fake masterpieces to the world's wealthiest elites without anyone noticing? In the second half of the 20th century, Knoedler's untouchable reputation was destroyed. As the market began to change, with the contemporary art market exploding into prominence, Knoedler found itself ill-equipped to adapt. The gallery, which had long thrived on dealing in old masters and established works, was quickly losing relevance. By 1970, its lavish spending habits caught up with it. Most notably, the purchase of a grand townhouse at 19 East 70th Street in Manhattan. Instead of being a symbol of success, the extravagant move drained the gallery's finances, leaving it on the brink of bankruptcy. Meanwhile, Armand Hammer, the oil tycoon with a questionable reputation, swooped in and bought the failing business for a mere $2.5 million in 1971. It was a lifeline, but Knoedler didn't owe its survival to Hammer's oil money. It owed it to Lawrence Rubin, one of its most morally questionable directors, who shifted the gallery's focus to contemporary art. Rubin understood that Knoedler needed to reinvent itself to survive in the cutthroat contemporary art market. He shifted the gallery's focus, bringing in celebrated modern artists like Richard Diebenkorn, Frank Stella, and Sean Scully. By tapping into the rising demand for contemporary arts, Rubin managed to stabilize Knoedler and reinvigorate its standing among collectors. His success, however, was not without its downside. The switch in focus came at the cost of abandoning Knoedler's historical roots, and the gallery's newfound emphasis on profit over principle laid the groundwork for more significant controversies to come. But Rubin's most controversial move came in the form of a surprising hire. Out of nowhere, he hired Anne Freedman, a 29-year-old receptionist from a rival gallery with no real experience, and quickly turned her into a power player with Knoedler. Freedman had little experience and even less influence in the art world, but Rubin saw something in her, or perhaps needed someone controllable enough to execute his vision. By 1994, Freedman was the gallery's director. But was she truly the talented visionary she appeared to be, or just another puppet in the ongoing manipulation of an art market built on smoke and mirrors? On a different note, Knoedler & Company began to succeed under Anne Freedman's leadership on the surface. Freedman, a born salesperson with a Rolodex of successful people, including big names like David Geffen, the Taubman family, and countless museum directors, gave the illusion of success. But the truth was very different. The year Freedman took over marked the beginning of Knoedler's disappointing experience. That same year, an unknown woman from Long Island, Glafira Rosales, an art world nobody, stepped into the gallery and changed its legacy forever. Domenico and Eleanor de Sol, a power couple living in luxury at their Hilton Head mansion with a brand of classism that only the ultra-rich can perfect. Domenico, hailing from Calabria and bouncing around Italy thanks to his military upbringing, used his Harvard law degree to pivot into high-stakes fashion. As Gucci Group's former CEO and co-founder of Tom Ford International, he built his empire on designer handbags, not courtroom victories. Meanwhile, Eleanor, in her own words, plays the role of Domenico's unpaid secretary, a title as self-deprecating as it is revealing. Despite their art-collecting obsession and bankrolling of creative endeavors, they deny being experts. Eleanor calls the shots on purchases, while Domenico remains more fluent in luxury accessories than fine art. Yet, Domenico now presides over Sotheby's as chairman, using his influence in one of the most prestigious auction houses in the world. In November 2004, the de Solis made their grand entrance to New York's Knoedler & Company Gallery, a fateful first and last visit. They weren't there for just any painting, but were in search of a Sean Scully masterpiece. Anne Freedman, the gallery's president, deftly deflected their request, claiming no Scullys were available while offering up a Mark Rothko she just happened to have in her office. Freedman fabricated a quite interesting tale of a mysterious Swiss collector and his privacy-obsessed family, an irresistible narrative for art world status seekers. The de Solis, barely pausing for thought, handed over a staggering $8.3 million for the Rothko, breaking their previous spending records without batting an eye. For legal reasons, or perhaps just good old-fashioned family politics, the painting was invoiced to their eldest daughter, Laura, to ensure she inherited it over her sister, Ricky. They were confident that the purchase would secure a priceless addition to their collection, a masterpiece that would be admired for years to come. Little did they know, their $8.3 million investment would soon become a key chapter in an unfolding scandal. At the time, Knoedler & Company, the gallery through which the de Solis made their purchase, was a prestigious institution with a reputation built on decades of selling high-end artwork. Under the leadership of Anne Freedman, the gallery had long catered to elite collectors, offering them exclusive access to some of the world's most sought-after art. However, from 1994 to 2008, a woman named Glafira Rosales masterminded an $80 million forgery scheme that ran through Knoedler. She was an ordinary Long Island-based art dealer. With the help of her alleged accomplices, José Carlos Bergantiños Diaz, his brother Jesus, and Pei Xin-kyung, a Chinese immigrant working from a makeshift studio in Queens, they flooded the market with 40 counterfeit masterpieces, passing them off as works by abstract expressionist titans like Mark Rothko, Jackson Pollock, and Robert Motherwell. The Desolis' prized $8.3 million Rothko, it was just one of the many well-crafted fakes produced by Kyun, who had perfected the art of imitation with such skill that even the most specialized collectors were fooled. The deception was so convincing that it took years before the truth was revealed. Nevertheless, a significant investment in high art turned out to be nothing more than a pawn in one of the biggest art forgery scandals of the century. In 2009, Knoedler received a grand jury legal summons. The lies were all exposed. The public first discovered Rosales' fraud in 2011, when the gallery abruptly closed its doors after 165 years in business. By 2013, Rosales had confessed the masterpieces she sold to Knoedler were Kyun's creations, cooked up in his Queens studio. Her charges ranged from tax evasion to wire fraud, and she now awaits sentencing. Meanwhile, the Diaz brothers, having fled the U.S., were arrested in Spain in 2014, but remain safely out of reach as extradition drags on. As for Kyun, he was back in China, swearing he had no clue his paintings were being passed off as high art. Throughout the debacle, Freedman held on to her story. The works were genuine, and she would eventually be vindicated. But with Rosales' guilty plea and mounting evidence of forgery, her insistence increasingly feels like either willful ignorance or outright complicity. The lawsuits continue to pile up, leaving Freedman and Knoedler's tarnished legacy in the crosshairs of art world history. The art market is a secret playground for the ultra-rich, often described as the world's largest unregulated industry. In context, this only comes after smuggling and contraband dealings. It usually depends on secrecy, with discretion elevated to an almost pathological art form. Oversight is virtually non-existent, creating a perfect breeding ground for ethically murky, if not outright illegal, behavior. So when collectors discovered they had been duped into buying fake works from Knoedler, many of them chose to protect their anonymity and settle quietly out of court. But with the Desolis, it was different. Refusing to bow to Knoedler's stonewalling tactics, they dragged the gallery into a courtroom showdown that took 4 years to materialize. Their accusations were explosive. For the last 15 years of its existence, Knoedler was no art gallery. It was a racketeering operation. Armed with federal laws, the Desols demanded $25 million in triple damages, turning the lawsuit into a legal war. This was against the defendants, a rogues gallery of art world heavyweights, including Anne Freedman, Knoedler's disgraced president, the gallery's parent company, the heir to Armand Hammer's fortune, and the man behind the scenes. When the trial began, it exposed one of the most brazen scandals the art world has ever witnessed, revealing the rot at the heart of an industry that has long prioritized profit and power over integrity. It turned out that ever since the days of the Knoedlers, the London office, with people like Letitia Simpson, worked behind the scenes to create fake pedigrees for their paintings, catering to their rich American clients, including Cornelius Vanderbilt, Andrew Mellon, and Henry Clay Frick. They didn't just sell art, they manipulated history, all while organizing private exhibitions and securing sale catalogs to feed the American elite's insatiable thirst for expensive, authentic art. In 2009, just 2 years before the shocking truth about Knoedler Gallery's $70 million sale of fake, abstract expressionist paintings started to surface, Anne Freedman suddenly resigned as director. Convenient timing, right? 2 years later, the once respected gallery was forced to shut its doors, and then the floodgates opened. Lawsuits against both Knoedler and Freedman accumulated out of nowhere. From the very start, the DeSolis made no attempt to hide their disdain for Anne Freedman, whom they seemingly viewed as the face of Knoedler's fraudulent empire. Domenico's suspicions about his $8.3 million Rothko being a fake were triggered in late 2011 when another duped collector, Pierre Lagrange, filed a lawsuit against the gallery. By the time the trial began, Domenico had clearly spent the last 5 years stewing in rage, using the courtroom as his stage to unload his grievances to an eager audience. Under oath, Domenico recounted how Freedman had assured him and Eleanor that 11 experts had authenticated the Rothko. Freedman's pitch was as fantastical as it was unbelievable. Who would have thought that the whole painting and all the other Rosales works came from an anonymous Swiss collector who allegedly built his fortune in the sugar trade, owned homes in Switzerland and Mexico, and insisted on absolute secrecy? What's even crazier is the fact that Freedman herself had no idea who this so-called collector was. Around Knoedler, he became an anonymous legend who was referred to as Mr. X. As for Freedman, she usually refers to him as Secret Santa. Despite the smoke and mirrors, the story of this mysterious benefactor kept changing. At first, the gallery claimed Mr. X had purchased the works with the help of Alfonso Osorio, a close friend of Pollock and other abstract expressionists, who was famously meticulous in keeping records. Yet no evidence existed to support this connection. Osorio's supposed involvement was a dead end. By the time the DeSolis walked into Knoedler, Freedman had changed the full story to a whole new narrative. The paintings were tied to David Herbert, a low-ranking employee at 2 prominent galleries during the 1950s. To add a dash of intrigue, Freedman also fabricated an elaborate backstory that Mr. X and Herbert had been secret lovers, and their affair explained why the mysterious collector was so desperate to remain anonymous. This lustful twist was supposed to lend credibility to a provenance story already riddled with lies. What emerged was a scandalous tale of deception, greed, and shifting lies, with Freedman at its center, peddling increasingly absurd stories to justify the sale of counterfeit art to some of the wealthiest and most gullible collectors in the world. The moment Anne Freedman took the leadership position at Knoedler in the mid-90s, the gallery was an art house of a bygone era, overshadowed by trendier art houses like Gagosian and Mary Boone. These people in Houston Street thrived in the 80s, selling cutting-edge contemporary art to Wall Street's newly minted millionaires. Meanwhile, Knoedler was stuck in the past, its stuffy reputation no match for the slick, money-driven energy that defined the art world's new guard. When the art market crashed in 1990, Knoedler was already limping, and the departure of its longtime director, Lawrence Rubin, dealt a near-fatal blow. Many contemporary artists Rubin had cultivated abandoned ship, leaving the gallery floundering. Freedman was initially supposed to share power with Donald Saff, a professional vice president, but in a Machiavellian twist, Saff was demoted to a mere consultant, reportedly at the behest of Michael Hammer, the grandson of Armand Hammer and Knoedler's true puppet master. Freedman had allegedly interfered with Hammer, an act that supposedly blindsided him. As the years passed, Knoedler's scandal started becoming impossible to ignore. Freedman's dramatic exit in 2009 was cloaked in mystery, though an email later revealed the level of pain she went through. She claimed she had been forced out, but what she didn't mention was the grand jury legal invite that followed her departure, or the FBI's investigation into Knoedler's stockpile of Rosales forgeries, which were quietly marked as not for sale while the feds closed in. By 2011, Michael Hammer had effectively gutted the gallery, selling its East 70th Street townhouse for a meager $31 million. This was half its asking price, and entertaining half-baked plans to relocate to Chelsea. On November 30 of that year, Knoedler's demise was as abrupt as it was undignified. Employees showed up expecting business as usual, only to find out the gallery's doors would close for good by the end of the day. Frank Del Dio, Freedman's hand-picked successor, resigned on the spot after meeting with Hammer, leaving Knoedler's legacy to collapse in a cloud of scandal and betrayal. The gallery's final exhibition, featuring work by sculptor Charles Simmons, was unceremoniously cut short. It was as though someone had flicked a switch, plunging Knoedler, a 165-year-old institution, into darkness, leaving behind nothing but questions, lawsuits, and a ruined reputation. Meanwhile, the very first email that destroyed the art world's latest scandal landed in Knoedler's inbox on November 29, 2011, and it was a bombshell. It revealed the results of forensic tests conducted on Untitled 1950, a Jackson Pollock painting sold by the gallery in 2007 to Pierre Lagrange, a flamboyant London hedge fund tycoon, for an amount of $17 million. The painting was a modestly sized work in Pollock's iconic drip and splash style, carrying his signature J. Pollock. But there was one massive problem. The paint contained pigments that weren't commercially available until the 1970s, at least over a decade after Pollock's fiery death in a car crash in 1956. Lagrange wasn't just discouraged by this discovery. Case in point, he had already caused an inconvenient situation in 2011 when he left his wife and 3 children to begin a high-profile relationship with 42-year-old fashion designer Ruby LaRuby. However, selling the bogus Pollock was supposed to help fund what was shaping up to be one of Britain's most surprising divorce settlements. Instead, Lagrange gave Knoedler an ultimatum: either refund the $17 million within 48 hours or face legal action. It turned out that the fraudulent Pollock was just the tip of the iceberg. The painting was one of roughly 20 works tied to the so-called David Herbert collection, a fabricated provenance, fabricated during Anne Freedman's tenure at Knoedler. Some of these works would go on to be exposed as forgeries, artificially inflated pieces that were knowingly passed off as authentic to wealthy buyers eager to flaunt their status. Even as the world of art evolved, Knoedler's dominance continued, using its shady practices to shape the collections of museums, universities, and private collectors, leaving a legacy of power, profit, and manipulation in its wake. The gallery's eventual fall from grace in the 21st century wasn't due to a lack of business savvy, but rather a scandal that finally exposed the ugly truth. Knoedler's legacy was built not on the appreciation of art, but on the exploitation of it. Yet even as the gallery collapsed, its long-lasting influence on the art market remains undeniable, having shaped the very institutions that still uphold it. The Knoedler Gallery may be gone, but the systems of control it helped create continue to dictate the world of high-end art. These paintings, with similarly dubious backstories, had been sold for tens of millions of dollars, feeding the gallery's coffers while perpetuating one of the most criminal art frauds in modern history. Do you think Freedman is simply a scapegoat for a much larger, deeply corrupt operation, or was she the mastermind behind one of the most brazen art fraud schemes in history? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. Also, don't forget to hit the like button and kindly subscribe to our YouTube channel.